The year was 1976 when Frank Sinatra brings Jerry Lewis's former partner, Dean Martin, on stage unannounced at the 1976 Jerry Lewis MDA Telethon in Las Vegas, reuniting the comedy team for the first and only time in over 20 years. Toronto Maple Leaf Darryl Sittler scores the winning goal in the 1976 Canada Cup for Canada, and a win over Czechoslovakia in overtime to win the first Canada Cup, which stayed in Canada. The semi-legendary 100 Club Punk Festival ignites the careers of several influential punk and post-punk bands, arguably sparking the punk movement's introduction into mainstream culture. Irish rock band U2 is formed after drummer Larry Mullen Jr. posts a note seeking members for a band on the notice board at his Dublin school. American singer Stevie Wonder releases his first hit, Songs in the Key of Life. In the same month, today's guest on FYIMUSICNEWS.ca Conversations in All Keys with Bill King, Glen Woodcock, began a 45-year run on CJRT FM, now Jazz FM in Toronto, with his big band show. Woodcock is a journalist, music curator, and automobile specialist, and championed the current Iron Man of Toronto radio, who grew up in the city and fell in love with the big band music as a teenager at the rock and roll craze height. He bought as many big band and jazz LPs as he could afford, first at Sam's Original Store on College Street, then at Sam's and A&A Records, Yonge Street locations. He also frequented antique and junk stores to buy every 78 RPM big band record he could find. Those LPs form the basis of the collection he still uses on the big bands with Glen Woodcock, and will celebrate its 45th anniversary on Jazz FM 91 in September 2021. During his years as broadcaster and entertainment editor at the Toronto Telegram, he met some greats in the world of jazz, from Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Buddy Rich, Ella Fitzgerald, Mel Torme, and many, many more. In November 2017, Woodcock was awarded the Ken Page Memorial Trust Lifetime Achievement Award at a gala. Star-studded jazz dinner at the Old Mill in Toronto. 45 years, right?
45 years this September, yes.
A journalist, right?
Well, simultaneously I was a journalist, yes. I took radio and television arts and then switched to journalism at Ryerson after my first year, because it used to be a common course, which was a great idea. And then I went to work for the Old Toronto Telegram as a sports writer, became entertainment editor. Every one of my writers and critics was older than me, so that was an experience, let me tell you. And then when the Telegram folded and the Sun started, I went to work for the Sun and eventually became associate editor.
In this part of your career, how long did that last? What did that span? What was
paper? Until they bought me out in 2008. They had bought me out. But by then, I was writing about cars. I was an automotive journalist, traveling all over the world. What a gig that was. And I continued to write freelance for them until Post Media bought Sun Media about 4 years ago, and they just terminated everybody at the Sun's automotive department. Overnight, our wonderful archives online just vanished.
Nobody knows where it's at, or what?
Oh, they're just gone.
They're just gone, huh?
They killed them.
That's amazing.
It's Paul Godfrey, so what do you expect?
A good friend of mine, Peter Blakeney, was writing. Mm-hmm. He was writing for cars, too.
Yes, Peter was a friend of mine, too.
Yeah.
Good writer.
We were in bands together.
Mm-hmm.
He was a bass player, a really good bass player, and with Anne Murray. And
right.
When I saw that he was writing that, I went, because I'd see his features in the Star, and I go, can this be the same guy, you know?
Yep.
So you've always had him.
He's an interesting cat. I like him. I always wanted to know, and he wouldn't tell me really what it was like, just to be in one of those big productions at the Royal Alex and just play the same stuff night after night after night.
Can you imagine being in what was it? Not Les Mis, but the other one that was the Phantom of the Opera.
Yeah.
That went on for years.
Yes.
I mean, the pay was great. I mean, if you stayed there and you doubled on an instrument or as such, your pay was great, and so was your.
Mm-hmm.
I would see the guys coming out of there at night, and they looked like death. It just looked like somebody drilled their skulls, right?
Yeah. Well, it's like any music business. Like my niche market, the big bands. How many times do you think that Glenn Miller wished he'd never recorded In the Mood? Every single show.
Yeah.
And everybody had to do that. I guess everybody still has to do that.
Well, that was my conversation going back 20 years or so ago with Artie Shaw, who was a character.
Yes, Ted O'Reilly and I interviewed him together. Oh man, many years ago.
Yeah.
When he had a ghost band led by that clarinet player from Boston. The band came and played for a week in Toronto, I think at the Imperial Room. And Artie came, sat down for an interview with Ted and I. And I mean, we're both experienced interviewers. And you know how it works. You lead people where they want to go. He wouldn't go. The most difficult person I ever interviewed in my life.
Gramercy, was that
Gramercy 5?
Yeah, the Gramercy 5. They had the reissue on CDs.
Yes.
Of that, and he was kind of focused on that. So our conversation was great because the music on, he got into this thing where, telling me that, I had to play Begin to Begin every night, but at the same time, he's saying I'm making $50,000 a week with my band during the height of that, right? And then he's complaining to me about that amount of money to play that song every night, his artistic conflicts with that.
Well, that's why he never kept a band more than about a year and a half. He had a band in 1937, and it didn't really go anywhere. It was an interesting band. You must have heard it. It was built around the traditional string quartet. It was an interesting band. Played some really, really wonderful stuff, but it was commercially unsuccessful. Then he started the band in 1938. That was a big hit. And he gave that up in 1940, and then was back in 1941 with a different band, the band with strings. Then he went into the Navy and started a band when he got out in 1944, Medical Discharge. That was, to me, the best band he ever had. And it had Roy Eldridge in it. And then he got tired of that and stopped it in 1946, went back to a big band with strings. And he must have had at least 8 different big bands. And
wives, too.
I think he had 9. Maybe it was 8, mixed up with Charlie Barnett.
Yeah, but like Lana Turner, I mean, some of these, then to hear the fickleness of living with the guy, right?
Yeah.
The toilet roll had to be a certain way and the paper coming down. And
I remember that from that documentary that Toronto filmmaker made. Yeah. I can remember the look on her face. She was telling that story, that the toilet paper had to be a certain way. I'd like to know which way it was. He was an interesting character. Did you ever read his book? It's a hard read. The Trouble with Cinderella.
When I was talking to him, he was doing the trilogy called The Sidemen.
Oh, okay. Did that ever get published?
I don't know. So you and big bands, what was the fascination? Where did that come from?
You want the real story?
Yeah. No, give me the lie. Yeah.
No, I'll give you the real story.
Okay.
I'm a teenager. It's I guess the late-ish 1950s, maybe 1957, 58. And I had an older sister, 3 years older than me, and she went on a ski outing with some of her friends from church. So these are, guys and girls, but 3 years older than me. And I went with them. And we're coming back in the car, and one of the guys was driving and said to me, "What kind of music do you like?" I said, "Well, rock and roll." And there was a Glenn Miller song playing on the radio, and he said, "Well, what about Glenn Miller?" And I said, "Yeah, I guess he's okay." And he said, "But you ever really listen to Glenn Miller?" did you ever really listen to what all the different instrumentalists are doing? And I said, no. And I knew how to do that because I'd taken music at school. And he said, okay, well, I'll shut up and you just listen. And I listened. And I thought, whoa, there's a whole level of stuff going on here that I really wasn't aware of. And I was at a family party a couple of weeks later, and one of my older cousins had a record player in her room, and I asked her if I could go and use it because I knew she had some Glenn Miller albums. And I spent the entire evening listening to her records, and then went out and earned some money and went out and bought my first record player, and my very first album was Glenn Miller. So I still have a fondness for the Miller Band today. I think it's been underrated by a lot of people over the years, especially in its early days. It played a lot of jazz. It really did. I still have a great fondness for it. And if I was pressed as to my favorite band of all time, it would have to be the Miller Band from probably 1942, when it was just so damn good.
It was a great era.
Oh, yeah.
I always think back to all the ballrooms and all the bands that played on the stages.
Yeah.
Across America, it was just extraordinary. These were their gigs,
Yeah. Between movies.
Yeah, between movies. And then
at the Paramount in New York City. That was a good gig.
It didn't last that long, though, did it?
No, it didn't.
No.
It didn't. The bands just became uneconomical after World War II. And the young guys who had gone out to dance and listened to them with their girlfriends before the war were now, trying to earn some money and support a family, and didn't have the dough to go out and dance the way they had. And the singers took hold because they could travel anywhere without a band at all. You could always, in a big city like Toronto or Chicago, you could always hire, 5 or 6 guys to play your arrangements behind you at a club. So that was the end. But the era is over, but the band business has never died.
Now, did you go to the Palais Royal?
No, I didn't. I've been there a lot, but not back in those days. I didn't.
I'm always fascinated when I see the list of bands that played there. That was on the tour schedule, somewhere in between there, and also where was it? Burlington. There was
the Brant Inn, and there was the Palace Pier in Toronto as well. Almost all of those old dance halls burned because they're made out of wood. This is the 100th anniversary this year of the Palais Royal.
Isn't that something?
Yeah. Originally, a dance hall built above a boathouse in Sunnyside.
Played there after it was renovated.
Yeah.
And then we rented it, I think, for the National Jazz Awards, and it was so expensive after that, we didn't go back. So I don't know where. It became like an event place, so as for specials, I don't know how any of those rooms have survived or year plus since COVID, because
well, it's owned by the city.
It's owned by the city and rented by whoever, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So when's this all going to end?
I don't know. So one of the funniest stories told to me was, I think it was Royal Winter Fair, and Benny Goodman's playing there, I guess in the 60s, and they would pick up local musicians, and Terry Clark's been hired to play drums.
Mm-hmm.
He shows up to play with Benny Goodman and everything, and get everybody situated. And Benny Goodman looks at Terry Clark and goes, "I remember you. Don't play." He said he'd never played with Benny Goodman. He made a mistake, so he had to sit there throughout the show. It's one of his great stories, He just sits there.
Well, I mean, the stories of Benny as an asshole are legendary. I hadn't heard that one before.
But that's a great one. I love this. So just sit there and don't play. Standoff between him and Artie Shaw is a great one, because Artie Shaw goes off on him. In the conversation I had with him, but he said that end up sometimes in the same session and they make Artie play alto sax or something on a studio thing. And he considered him a better clarinet player than Benny Goodman. So I can't imagine what the rivalry was like back then,
No. I always preferred Shaw. I thought there was such a magic liquidity to his upper register playing. It was amazing. But, you know, Benny was pretty good, too.
But to have Earl Father Hines in the band, and, you know, when you hear the singers from that time, they didn't go back and redo their tracks, or they didn't overdub. When you see the footage of them stand up there in black and white in Monoro, and they sing, it's perfection.
And they'd have probably 2 hours in the studio and were expected to get 4 sides out of it. And, you know, mostly they did 1 or 2 takes, and that was it, with one overhead mic for the band and a mic for the singer. You know, no mixing, no individual mics for the soloists, or and you could make an album in a couple of days. And now it takes a couple of months, sometimes a couple of years.
It depended on who it is. You know?
Where's the spontaneity? That's why people, I think, like live music so much, is because there's such spontaneity.
With the current world of pop music, since it's basically what we call sound architecture, you have 9 producers and 9 writers,
yes.
Which is, I find, astounding. I would lose my mind with that many people involved with a song. You know what I mean?
I do.
It takes
I can't imagine. I just can't imagine.
And it's an entirely different world of just going into the studio and being prepared, or just run through, or like a Frank Sinatra, just come in and sing.
Yeah, and not really taking it seriously until he had to. I don't know if you've ever heard of any of his rehearsal tapes. But I've got some. He's cracking jokes, and he's making mistakes, and he's doing stuff on purpose. And then, you know, a couple of hours later, they'd actually do the live radio show, and he'd be perfection. The musicians back then were good. And I was on a big band cruise on the old Queen Elizabeth II, maybe 10 or 12 years ago. It was a transatlantic crossing with 4 bands. No, 6. We had 6 bands. And 3 would play on one night, and 3 would play the next. Ray Anthony was there. He had a band. He had also another band that played the Billy May book, because he owned that. What's his name? Bob Wilbur was there with a band that played Benny Goodman. There was a guy I didn't know who fronted one of the 2 official Harry James bands. And they had a session one afternoon in the theater that passengers were invited to come to and ask questions of all the band leaders. I remember that one guy got up in the audience and said, you know, I don't know where music's going, but the kids today, they just can't play music like these old guys. And one of them got up, it was the Harry James leader, and I can't remember his name. And he said, I really have to disagree with that. The kids that are coming out of university and college today can play more stuff than we could back then, and some of them can play way more stuff than we can now. Their educations are so good. My friend Jim John, the leader of Swing Shift Big Band, keeps kind of an unofficial list, and he says, counting rehearsal bands, this is before COVID, there were 40 bands in Toronto in the GTA. It's astounding, isn't it? Some of them have regular gigs. Usually they're just monthly gigs, or like John McLeod and the Rex Hotel.
Yeah.
But the Advocates Big Band, they're really improving. They're a damn good band now. They had a monthly gig. Some of them have more than monthly gigs, and some of them are still just rehearsal bands. But 40. There's no shortage of good players in this city, as you probably know as well as anybody.
When I first got started, and I was about 15 or 14,
yeah,
and we played clarinet, and my dad took us to, every city had civic orchestras, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we joined a civic orchestra just outside of Louisville, and we would go every Thursday night, and they would play a variety of music from Glenn Miller to, Sound of Music and whatever. Most people were much older than us, but we got the experience of showing up and taking our seat, playing the music, taking the music home and working through it. and learning to play with 16, 18 pieces. And then from there, I was for 2 years, I played every Friday and Saturday night with a 16-piece big band, which played everything under the sun that was in a big band book.
Yeah.
And
okay.
then
all the hits.
I learned what the piano player does. Next to nothing. So, just unfold paper.
That's when you shifted focus?
On the sheet of music, all right, it would just be chords, right? So the chords forever. And then there'd be a little twink, little thing for the piano where he just hit a high note.
Yep.
And I would look ahead and I'd think about my solo, and the impression those two notes was going to make, right? And I just hoped I counted the right amount of bars.
Yeah.
It was great training. And I think on the other side of it is the fact that we got to see Duke Ellington, we got to see Stan Kenton's Artistry and Rhythm live. We got to see these bands live where we were. And I remember one of the most frustrating things was I was a big Count Basie band fan. And the Musicians Union, New Year's Eve, brought the Basie band in. So being kids, we were allowed to stand on the side of the band, but we couldn't go anywhere near any alcohol.
Right.
So we stood on the side of the band, and I'm like 1 foot from the bandstand, and it's just, it's a big, huge sound, and everything is slow. All the music is slow. It's the other book. It's not Whirly.
The dance band book.
It's the dance band book.
Okay.
And I remember saying to one of the players, I just walked up and I says, me and my brother are here. Can you play such and such song, that has a nice tempo to it? And they went into it for 3 minutes, and that was it.
I got to meet Basie, Duke Ellington, and Buddy DeFranco, Guy Lombardo even, Peggy Lee, Ella Fitzgerald, when I was the entertainment editor at the Telegram. I don't know whether you've been in Toronto long enough to remember Gino Empri.
Gino tried to manage me one time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you know Gino.
I know Gino.
When I was the young entertainment editor at the Telly in 1969, Gino would come in, and one of his accounts was the Imperial Room. And he would try and sell me on whatever second-rate Las Vegas act they had brought in for the week. And I'd say, no, I'm not interested in having anybody do a story on them or even reviewing their act. And finally, one day, he stamped his foot in my office and said, all right, then, what the do I have to do to get you to cover the acts at the Imperial Room? And I said, okay, here's what you have to do. And I ticked them off on my finger. I said, you got to bring in Ella Fitzgerald, Duke Ellington, the Glenn Miller Orchestra, Count Basie, Peggy Lee, and I went on and on. And to his great credit, Gino went back to his bosses at CP Hotels, who ran the Royal York, and they brought all of those guys in. That became their new policy, and it lasted for a long time. So I got to go every week, front row seat, sometimes sit with these guys, sometimes go backstage. Or with Duke Ellington, I went up to his room, my girlfriend and I. He invited us up to his room after the show, and he gave me what was his concoction for a long life. And it was a regular Coke poured into a big tall glass, and then several teaspoons of sugar mixed into it.
Ooh, ooh.
And he gave that to me, and I pretended to like it.
That would have made the skin jump.
Mel Torme, one of the nicer guys I've ever met in show business. I went to see him one night. I can't remember what club he was playing at, but it was in between sets, and I got there, and they introduced him to me. He found out that I hadn't had any supper. So he went back to his dressing room and brought me out a Snickers bar.
Hey, but what a great place to hear music, though.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that stage, the sound. I played on that stage many times, and it was always great being on the stage and looking out into the audience.
Yeah, that's a good room. It actually is a good sounding room.
Yes, it was, because of the way it was padded.
And I saw Ella there, and I I couldn't go to her opening, which was always on Monday nights. I couldn't go to her opening. I can't remember why. But I'm like 25 years old, and I look like I'm 15. And I went down to the hotel in the afternoon when I found out she would be rehearsing, and I just kind of sneaked into the Imperial Room, and there's Ella and the band and me, and I'm sitting as unobtrusively as possible off to the side, and she sings a couple of songs, and then she stops, and she comes over to me, and she said, "I'm sorry, but I don't let anybody sit in on my rehearsals." And I sweet-talked her and told her that I couldn't be at her opening and who I was, and she let me stay. So that's one of the great highlights of my life. I got to hear Ella rehearse when nobody else did.
Those are magic moments, too. You're just running through the material, you know?
Yeah.
So,
the big bands have been good to me.
You thinking of hanging on a lot longer here?
I'll do it as long as they let me.
I like that attitude. You're running up in territory now with Wally Crowder and
Asked him. He was at RB for 50 years, but he only did the regular gig, the morning show, for 43.
But Roger Ashby is 47, 48.
So, I'm 45, same show, same station.
So that's remarkable. And Jazz FM is just great. I know everybody loves you there, and they love the show. And
I can't imagine it not being there. And I've always believed that there's such a vibrant jazz community in Toronto because we are there. And people find out, oh, I can go and hear Bill King here, or whatever. There's a symbiotic relationship between, the musicians and the radio station. I think it's really nice.
To me, it's the loss of the Dave McMurtles, the Rob McConnells, the Jim Galloways.
Murdo always wanted to come on my show because he insisted that he didn't have a big band. I said, yes, you do, a dance band. And he always wanted to come on my show and debate me and play his kind of stuff. And then he died.
Yeah.
And we never got to do it.
No. There was that pocket of time, maybe a 20-year period there when these guys sort of, and Mo Kaufman too, they were the guys, they were the central figures of everything. And they put people in seats. So if you went to the TD Jazz Festival and you came in for the lunch crowd, people were there to see Rob McConnell, there to see Jim. That's gone.
Yes, it is. The Georgia's spaghetti houses are gone, where you could go and hear Mo Kaufman. I've played a couple of tracks for this week's show from the jazz album, the Boss Brass album that changed the whole approach in 1976. It was put out by Attic Records, and one of my friends was the co-founder of Attic Records along with Al Mayer. And they're all pictured on the back of the album jacket. And I commented on it on the show because I said, I'm looking at these guys, and they're all young. And I said, now these guys are my contemporaries, maybe some of them a little bit older. But yeah, it's such a long time ago that they made this recording that we were young.
Any band you missed out on that you didn't get to see that you say in your lifetime, that's the one I had to see, but I can't believe I never got the opportunity?
Well, I would have loved to have seen Shaw or Miller, especially at the Café Rouge.
See, there you go.
In the Hotel Pennsylvania. And a friend of mine who used to have a band was down there, 20 or 25 years ago, and it was closed, and the Hotel Pennsylvania had gone downhill a lot. But he went in and asked if he could see the Café Rouge, and it was still there. And he said he was amazed at how small it was.
And those are the things that stick too. All these places always have a larger-than-life imagination of what they were,
Yeah. Or seeing, say, the Miller Band at the Meadowbrook, or Glen Island Casino, when it was just getting going, and the crowds would have been so huge and so excited. That's before I was born, but I would have liked to have seen it.
This would have been every night of the week nearly, too.
Yeah.
This is what you could have 1,000 people out every night.
Yeah.
That's what I find so extraordinary, you know?
And then the war came along, and probably bands were never more popular than during World War II.
And needed.
And then the war ended. The guys came home and started having families and buying houses in the suburbs, and couldn't go out dancing with their girl, now their wife, once or twice a week. Just couldn't do it. And it became so hugely expensive to travel with a big band. It's 1947. I forget how many 7 band leaders just called it quits within weeks of each other in 1947. Most of them came back, like Dorsey and Basie. But Basie had his septet for a while because he just couldn't make any money in the big band business, and neither could Tommy Dorsey. He came back too, but the dance halls were gone. A different kind of jazz came along.
The bebop rolled in.
Stan Kenton, bebop, and also concerts. Stan Kenton got to do what Artie Shaw always wanted to do, play his kind of music with no dancers, no jitterbugs out front. That's how Kenton kept going for all those years, was those concert sessions. People adapt.